All right, so we're ranking all of the Elden Ring DLC talismans. A bunch of new ones got added, and frankly, many of them are some of the best talismans in the entire game. So we're gonna rank all of them from worst to best. They're not all great though, and that's the thing. That's why we've got a gradient here. There are some that are certainly not so good, and some that are just objectively like some of the best for just about any build. Now, a lot of these talismans are build dependent, so my ranking of these could be maybe a little bit subject to your build and your playstyle preference, but in general, I did my best with trying to rank order these and give you guys a good explanation of what they do, what you should use for your builds, and which ones you definitely can't afford to miss. All right, so let's just get into this. The worst talisman in the entire DLC, I think, is bar none the Immunizing Horn Charm +2. This is a stronger version of a talisman that already exists in the base game, and this essentially reduces your build up to Scarlet Rot and Poison, and that's basically it. You know, it might take you a little bit longer to proc Poison and or Scarlet Rot, which can be useful in a handful of certain specific situations, maybe a few boss fights, but mostly for level traversal and stuff like that. But really, at the end of the day, there are other items that are better at taking care of that can outright get rid of the status, so I just don't really have much use for this, and taking up a full talisman slot just for this just doesn't seem to be worth it. All right, so coming up next is the Clarifying Horn Charm. It took me like 100 tries to say that correctly. Try to say that fast. But anyways, the Clarifying Horn Charm is quite similar to the previous, and instead of reducing your resistance buildup to Scarlet Rot and Poison, this actually affects your buildup of Madness and Sleepiness. So, you know, if you tend to get EP a lot, you know, this might be for you, but realistically, enemies using sleep on you is just not something you're going to encounter a whole lot in this game. However, the resistance to Madness, I guess, does have a little bit of a use case, especially against Midra, but again, compared to all the other talismans that you could be using, a little bit of resistance to madness probably just isn't worth the slot that it requires, and this one's really not so good compared to the rest in this list. Moving on to the Ailment Charm. I don't really understand this one, honestly. Like, basically, it reduces your status buildup of the last afflicted ailment you had, but in order to get the benefit of it, you need to be inflicted with something to begin with. So, I mean, I guess if you're willing to take one for the team to then have further resistance to the next one, which just seems counterintuitive and just not very efficient. I don't know, like, unless there's some super secret big brain strategy to this talisman that I just don't get, I don't see any point in running this. I would stay far away from this thing, just really not worth it at all. All right, so next is the Modeled Necklace +2. You know, this is, again, also a stronger one of one that's already in the base game, but it's pretty bad. It basically is like the jack of all trades. It's kind of, you get everything in it. It gives you extra immunity, robustness, and focus. So, you know, it helps against that sleep and poison and madness buildup, kind of all across the board, just status effects. But once again, I just don't think it's worth it personally. You know, it's just not very good. Up next, we have the Stalwart Horn Charm +3, another slightly useless talisman. I would say actually marginally more useful than the previous, just because of the, you know, effects that it has on the status buildup. Basically, this is the strongest charm that prevents blood loss and frost buildup, which is pretty useful. There's a lot of bosses and even just regular enemies that can proc this in the game, and there are certain, you know, frostbite inflicting bosses that can be hella annoying, so it might be a little useful to have some resistance to that. Just sacrificing a whole talisman slot for that just isn't worth it. If there was like a fifth one for this, you know, a slot that wouldn't take up your other four, maybe fair enough, but really I can't justify having this on all the time. It's okay. I wouldn't say it's worth going out of your way for though. Coming up next, we have St. Trina's Smile, which is a talisman that increases your attack power with sleep in the vicinity, and so this can be pretty effective for sleep-based builds, which are a bit more niche, and I don't think the average player is really having a sleep optimized build. But, you know, stuff like when you're fighting the Godskin duo, for example, they're particularly vulnerable to sleep builds, and if you're having trouble with them, then St. Trina's Smile can definitely bolster your build there. But again, for the most part, it's a pretty rare niche thing. Most people aren't using sleep, and for the marginal attack power benefits that you get from it, I think there's other ways to bolster that attack power. Just be slightly more efficient going about it. But again, if you have a hyper sleep build, then maybe this is the one for you. But coming up next is actually a similar situation. This is the Aged One's Exaltation Talisman. This does the exact same thing as St. Trina's Smile, where it increases your attack power, but this is with Madness in the vicinity. I would say this is more useful because Madness builds are a little bit more common, and especially in the DLC, there is a very, very effective Madness weapon that you can use, and this talisman will actually bolster that build. You will genuinely see some impact from this one, so it's not totally useless. I will say it's just very niche, and not everybody's going to find usefulness out of this talisman, but it's actually a good thing to have in the game. Moving on to our next one, we have the Arrow Soaring Sting Talisman. Now, I'm going to keep it real. This one is decent. Essentially, this increases the effective range of all bows and raises the attack power of all arrows and bolts. So basically, if you're using a bow and arrow kind of build, this thing is just going to flat out give you better damage and range. There are literally no drawbacks to running this. I guess my question is, though, who's actually using bow and arrows in 2024? I mean, for real. Like, it's like, grow up, guys. I mean, I'm kidding. Bow and arrows are a perfectly valid play style, a perfectly legit weapon. I'm messing around. But if you like to use bow and arrows, definitely use this talisman. Again, no drawbacks, and will just flat out increase your damage. It's a pretty good deal. All right, our next talisman here is one that I know is objectively not the best. There are more efficient ways of dealing with FP restoration, but to be honest, it's one that I just personally really like. This is the Blessed Blue Dew Talisman. So the way this works is that it just gradually restores FP over time, infinitely. However, it's slow, and I mean, like, very slow. But the thing is, for me, I found that, you know, if you're doing something where you're going to be dungeon crawling for a long time, or you're in an area where you're in between graces for a pretty significant period of time, and you're just not able to restore them, it's kind of nice just to have in your back pocket while you're exploring. You know, if you're not engaging in combat all the time, your FP will come back, you know, rather quickly. It's kind of cool to have. They have an FP version of this talisman as well, and that's decent for restoring your health. So even though they're not great, I still really like them. And personally, I find them useful. I know not everybody will, but I think they're decent, all things considered. All right, this next talisman is where things get a little bit interesting. This is the Fine Crucible Feather Talisman. So this one's strange. What does this do exactly? According to the description, this improves backsteps, but increases damage taken by 15%. So what does that mean in effect? Well, basically, backstepping is your way of dodging without actually inputting any direction. And backstepping in Souls games, and specifically in Elden Ring, has always been looked at as a pretty bad option. Like, I mean, again, there are ways to use backstepping that are effective, but I cannot recommend that for the general player. Most people are going to be rolling. They're going to find a lot more, you know, general usage out of rolling, and backstepping is a very risky kind of endeavor. And the other thing is, even when applying this, even though you get more iframes on your backstepping, it's still going to increase your damage taken by 15%. So if you do get hit, I mean, you're still going to eat the damage that you probably would have otherwise. I just don't know if this one is going to be recommended for the general player. For very specific builds, like if you want to go for a Bloodborne style play, go for it, man. But otherwise, I don't think I can recommend this to everybody. All right, anyways, the next talisman is from the Divine Lion, and you actually get it from getting a item from its remembrance, and this is the Enraged Divine Beast Talisman. So what does this do? All it says is it raises the potency of storms, and for any kind of Ashes of War that involves storms, such as like Black Flame Tornado, that's one that I really like. This is going to make that increasingly more effective, and so if your build happens to focus on an Ash of War storm, you'll probably get some use case out of this. I don't know how useful this is going to be in PvE gameplay. I mean, honestly, this might be more of a PvP thing. I'm not really sure how people are going to use this, but not one that I'm going to find myself, you know, gravitating towards too much. But, you know, if you're using specifically a Storm Ash of War, you'll probably like this one. For these next few talismans, we're going to knock a bunch of these out at once. These are all of the Drake talismans, and no, not that Drake. These are all of the actual status reductions that you can get from a very specific type of damage. So we have the Bolt Drake Talisman +3, Spell Drake, Flame Drake, and Pearl Drake. So what these do respectively is Bolt Drake reduces your lightning damage, Spell Drake reduces your magic, Flame Drake reduces your fire, and Pearl Drake reduces all non-physical damage. You've got your lightning, fire, magic, non-physical covered. There is one more. It's not a Drake talisman, but it's actually the Golden Braid, and this reduces your holy damage taken by the utmost. This one is really good for the DLC because there's a lot of enemies that use holy damage, and specifically, I would recommend using this one. It's pretty damn good. But you got all your basic basic elemental, you know, defense reductions, but you also have another kind of unique one that is a Pearl Shield Talisman. It functions like the Pearl Drake, but really it is more effective when you're blocking. Like, it specifically kind of interacts with your damage when you're holding shield or something like that. So if you have a shield-based build and you want to take less non-physical damage, then I suppose this one is worth going after as well. I don't think it's the most useful thing, but it's pretty decent. Next up here is a pretty special one as well. This is the Talisman of the Dread, and this works like the Storm one we just talked about. However, this increases the potency of magma damage, not fire, which is a little bit different. There are certain weapons that actually take advantage of magma instead. They're a bit more rare. I would say just about as rare as storms, but if you're using a magma-based build specifically, then this one you're actually going to get a lot of use out of. It will increase your damage output by a significant margin. So, I mean, if that's something you want to find, then definitely go after this one. Coming up next is the Sharp Shot Talisman, which increases your damage with precision aim shots. So if you're aiming down the sights with your bow in the first-person view, you're going to get some extra damage on that. Now, this can actually be stacked with the Arrow Sting one we talked about and another Arrow Soaring Talisman, and you can actually get an increase of damage by about 32% per arrow, which is pretty sick, again, for bow builds, which, you know, again, who uses bows in 2024? But, I mean, if you are one of those people, then this one is certainly worth stacking with others, and you can make a pretty strong lineup if you have all of these acquired. So this next talisman is another kind of weird one, but it's one that I've grown to appreciate quite a lot in knowing how it stacks with other stuff. This is Relana's Cameo, and the description of this is very vague. It basically says that it'll increase your attack power the longer you like hold a stance, essentially. And so what this means is that certain Ashes of War that can be held before activating, such as like Square Off or even Unsheath, which is a really good one, these will get granted extra attack power when you hold it for a couple of seconds. This can also be stacked with the Charm of Alexander for an increase of 32% damage of your Ash of War, which is absolutely insane. So definitely putting these two together is worth it if you have an Ash of War that can be held. Next talisman on our list here is far less confusing, but this is the Dried Bouquet. Very straightforward, increases your attack power when your summoned spirit dies. So if you're using summoned spirits to, you know, help you with boss fights, then you are going to get some benefit out of this one. If you're doing no summons, then this talisman is absolutely worthless to you. It's totally build and playstyle dependent, very straightforward, doesn't need much explanation, but I think it's pretty good if you are using it. Moving on, we have the Shattered Stone Talisman, which is a pretty straightforward one as well. It increases the attack power of a lot of stomp skills in the game, but also with the recently added hand-to-hand combat weapons, this will also increase all of the damage that those output by about 10%. So it's pretty solid there. If you're going for one of these like hand-to-hand combat kind of weapons, this one is an absolute must-have because there's really nothing else that's as straightforwardly just going to boost your damage like this outright on every single applicable move. This goes for stomps and kicks alike. Our next talisman is an incredibly straightforward one. It's pretty good. It's not amazing, but it's fine. This is the Lacerating Crosstree Talisman. What this does is increase your dash attack damage by about 15%. That's pretty good. I mean, I don't really know of a whole lot of builds or playstyles that fundamentally rely on dash attacks. This is anything that you'll do out of a sprint, which again is pretty rare. It's not that you'll never use it, but I don't know if that necessarily justifies a talisman slot. It's good for what it is if you like dash attacks, but I mean, other than that, I can't really think of much use cases. Next up is the Outer God Heirloom. What does this do? It raises Arcane, and that's it. If you need Arcane, it's pretty good. That's about all I got to say. Next up is a much more interesting talisman, and I would argue really good. This is the Crusade Insignia. What does this do exactly? It raises your attack power after defeating an enemy. This is most certainly not recommended for boss fights. I think that should go without saying, because the effect won't proc unless you kill an enemy first. So while this is not recommended for boss fights, it's actually pretty good if you're going to be like exploring, dungeon crawling, or even just killing regular enemies. And if there's a lot to deal with, then after killing one, you'll get a lot of attack power for the rest of them. This is good, again, just for mobs and stuff like that. Don't bring this in boss fights. I mean, do yourself a favor. Now we're getting into the upper echelon of some of the best talismans in the DLC. This next one is going to be the Cerulean Medallion +3. This is going to be the largest extension of your FP bar. So for any magic and sorcery based builds, you'll probably get a lot of use out of this. Personally, I don't find myself using it a ton, but if you need FP, you need magic, then this one is great. And it's going to extend that maximum bar by a pretty large amount. Next up is another really good one for magic and sorcery builds, the beloved Stardust. This actually shortens shortens the casting time of all sorceries and spells, which is insane. But unfortunately, it does increase the damage that you take. So there's a bit of risk and reward going on there. If you think you're very proficient with magic and sorceries and you just want a faster casting time and are willing to accept the sacrifice of, you know, being a bit more squishy, then this is definitely going to be a fun one because it's just fun casting stuff really fast and reducing that amount of time. I'd say this is a very good one. Our next one is very strange, but it's unique, and I think I would recommend it to a certain set of players. This is the Talisman of Lords bestowal. This will increase your poise after drinking a flask of tears, and this lasts for about 2 seconds after drinking a flask. I'm going to recommend this for people who maybe are learning the game and find themselves constantly getting punished every time they go to heal. I think this will allow you to stay on your feet and kind of figure out what you did wrong. While I can't recommend this for more experienced players, I think it's kind of cool having a talisman that will prevent you from getting, you know, stun locked or knocked down after, you know, healing a bunch. I would say from this point, we're getting into our top tier talismans. These are going to be the best of the best, in my opinion, in the DLC, and ones that I think just generally for almost every builder worth going after. This one is the Cerulean Seed Talisman +1. You get this from doing a part of a quest line. We'll talk about why this is so effective with another one in a minute, but this essentially increases the amount of FP restored per flask. So at some point, it just becomes a math equation. If you have a lot of FP flasks, every time you use one, you're getting like a bonus out of that. And so you can get some pretty wicked restoration. It works like a sacred tier, but for FP, and it's really, really good. It's a better version than one that's already in the base game. I think this one's excellent, and it's pretty easy to get as well. So I'd go out of your way to obtain this one. The next on our list is the Veridian Amber Medallion +3. I mean, lads, honestly, this one speaks for itself. If you want to increase that stamina bar as much as you can without having to dump hundreds of thousands of runes into leveling up endurance, then this is the one for you. You'll get a lot of bang for your buck. Next one is, though, a magnificent talisman. I love this thing. This is the Blade of Mercy, and so I like combining this one with a talisman that's already in the base game. But what does Blade of Mercy do? This increases your attack power after landing a critical hit. So I like to combine this with the Dagger Talisman, which increases your critical damage when you land one. So not only will you get, you know, a better critical attack, but you'll also power up after landing one. And this can really help you swing momentum in your favor in boss fights and help you significantly power up during the battle. I think for fighting bosses specifically, I don't think you get much of a better duo than this. I mean, if you're knocking them down a lot and you can get a lot of critical hits, you're going to find the most effectiveness out of, you know, combining these two talismans. But moving on to our next talisman is the Crimson Amber Medallion +3. I think this is a lot of people's saving grace in the DLC. What does it do? It makes red bar bigger. That's it. Yeah, that's all it does. Our next talisman is also an excellent one, but I will say is very situational. This is the Talisman of all Crucibles, and the item description is not incredibly useful here, but essentially what this does is it does increase all general damage you take, but it will specifically reduce damage from critical hits, headshots, and also improves the effectiveness of both rolling and backstepping. So you'll get more iframes with both of your, you know, primary dodges, essentially, but you are going to take more damage in general. I'm still not totally sure if that's worth the trade-off. I haven't really come to a verdict on this one yet. I need to use it more. There'll probably be a lot of you maybe who have some opinions on this one, but I do think that it's potentially a very excellent talisman and even top tier if used properly. All right, guys, next is the Vertigos Discus Talisman, and this is for the people that don't own a B button, who never press circle. For those lads who just put on hella armor, get a big old shield, a giant sword, and just tank every hit, this one's for you because it raises your defense the higher equipment load you have. So for those people who don't even own a circle button, this talisman is for you. It'll basically make you an almost invincible tank. This right here is the talisman that would make Havel very proud, so it's great. But anyways, moving on to our next one is the Two-Handed Sword Talisman. I use this one all the time, and I think it's very practical. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but any kind of two-handed weapon you're using, you're just going to get a flat damage increase on that. So any two-handed weapons whatsoever, it's very applicable, and you just straight up get more damage. I don't think you can really beat that. All right, guys, this one's strange. I'm gonna be honest. This is the Perfume Talisman. It's kind of new, but it's really just enabling the meta of now people are just killing bosses with perfume and using that as their primary weapon, if you're out here, you know, spritzing bottles, if you're hitting bosses with the Bed Bath and Body Works, then I mean, this talisman is going to be an absolute must-have. It's actually not found in the DLC map itself. It's found somewhere else in Altus. This talisman will significantly bolster your perfume's damage, and I think that this meta has gone a little bit unchecked. We'll see if any changes get made to this because it's pretty busted right now. So if you're coming out here spraying down bosses with some Versace, I mean, more power to you, and just make sure you go and get this talisman and do yourself a favor. It's going to make it a lot easier, honestly. But anyways, moving on to almost the top of our list here, our next talisman is the Retaliatory Crossed Tree. So why is this one very good? This increases your damage and attack power shortly after rolling. And lads, I mean, we all know how common rolling is. We all know how much you're going to be doing it. And honestly, one of the primary combat tactics is getting a small hit after rolling, like essentially, especially for punishing bosses in between moves and stuff like that. You're going to be doing it a lot. I mean, I think that goes without saying. So any kind of talisman that will just buff you every time you roll is, I think, one of a kind and certainly worth using. It's probably one of the most effective talismans in the whole game. Now, you do have to complete a fairly involved quest in order to get this one. It's not the longest quest in the world, but you can't just walk up and pick it up. So you'll need to do a little bit of homework in order to obtain this one. But I mean, the homework is worth it. I would certainly advise going after this one. It's useful for just about any build in the game, and you're going to get a lot of mileage out of this one. But heading over to our next talisman is the Crimson Seed Talisman +1. Once again, similar to the Cerulean one, it's already in the base game, but this is the most effective version of it, and you'll also getting this by doing the same quest that we mentioned before. It's fairly easy to pick up. However, what this does is it works like a sacred tier. It just makes your flasks more effective. And again, it's kind of a math equation. If you have like 13 or 14 HP flasks, every time you use one, you're going to get a pretty decent chunk of extra health back. And I think it's very good for endurance, good for withstanding boss fights and trying to learn them, because it just fundamentally allows you to stay alive for longer. I think it's excellent and honestly underrated. But finally, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you have all been waiting for, the best talisman in all of Elden Ring, and specifically in the DLC, I would say is the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman. Now, there is another version of this, the green turtle one in the base game, that restores your stamina faster. However, the Two-Headed Turtle one brings it back even quicker, and it's insanely fast. The thing is, you use stamina for everything you do in the game. Attacking, rolling, dodging, sprinting, you name it. Jumping, like everything. You're going to use stamina all the time, so you need to have it coming back quickly. I would argue the amount that it restores at is significantly more important than the maximum amount you have. That's why I think it's better than the like Veridian Amber medallion and stuff like that. You literally can't get better than the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman. Go out of your way to get this one right now. If you don't get anything else from this video, make sure you pick this one up, and it's pretty easy to get to. That's how all of the DLC talismans stack up. Some of them are the best in the whole game, and I would say maybe even the Soul series. Some of them are borderline useless, but regardless, I think they're all kind of fun and unique, and they're definitely cool and nice additions to have in Shadow of the Erdtree. But hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more Elden Ring. I would really appreciate it if you haven't already, and I will see you all in the next video. Take it easy, and peace out, guys.